Alas, all good things must come to an end, and here we are in our last podcast, which is also the last stop on the Grand Tour. We are going to be in the United States for the entirety of this module. We are going to look at innovations in American painting in the 20th century, especially in the 1950s. It's interesting to track the shifting of the art world, the center of the art world, from place to place. During the Renaissance, it's going to be in Italy. During much of the 18th and 19th centuries, it's going to be in Paris. And when we get to the 20th century, the center of gravity of the art world, where the most important cutting edge stuff is going to be happening, shifts to New York City. So the good old USA makes a name for itself as the center of the art world. Now, there are several reasons for this happening. One is that in New York City, in the 1920s, the late 1920s, the Museum of Modern Art opens up. This is going to be a venue that is showcasing painters who have been working especially since the turn of the century. And this is the first museum in the West that is totally committed to modern art. So that's a big deal. Another reason that New York becomes the center of the art world is because of World War II. A lot of the cutting edge European artists who were working in France and Germany over on the continent, when Hitler comes into power, a lot of them get out of Dodge. They leave Europe and they come to the United States sort of as refugees, and they bring with them their ideas and their influences, and they are extremely crucial in the shape of American art from the late 1930s on. A lot of them go on to teach at colleges and universities in the United States. So all these European modernist painters uh, take root in America, and in many ways, the innovations in American art after World War II are due to their influence. One of the themes that has been developing in art, especially since Cubism and Surrealism, is a shift in how paintings are perceived. For hundreds and hundreds of years, the purpose of a painting is simply to copy or reproduce as realistically as possible the outside world. All a painting is just a representational kind of copy. And as we move into the 20th century, that role is going to change, in part because of the advent of photography, which can do realism a lot better than a painting can. Many artists begin to say, what can painting do that photography can't? And so a lot of paintings are going to be about expressing inner feelings, inner emotions. Painting is going to shift from a focus on the external observed world to the interior subjective world of the artist. And as we get into abstraction, we are going to see that more and more. Painters are trying to express their feelings rather than simply reproduce visual reality. In the wake of World War II, as I said before, New York City becomes the center of the art world. And New York actually lends its name to a group of painters who become known as, rather uncreatively, as the New York School. And New York School is pretty synonymous with another more fancy term called abstract expressionism. This is a uniquely American contribution to artwork, and there are two kind of main branches of abstract expressionism. One is called action painting, and the other is called color field painting. And there is a little bit of debate about how some of these terms are used. Sometimes action painting and abstract expressionism are used interchangeably, and color field painting is separate from abstract expressionism. Just kind of depends on who you ask. I'm going to group action painting and color field painting under abstract expressionism and use it as a big word covering both of those things. Now, the abstract expressionists, or the New York School, uh, didn't, like many of these art movements, didn't get together and decide to start a movement. They were all working in very different sort of styles, and maybe had similar philosophies, but it's, again, a term that has been given by art critics as a label for these painters. So let's dig into a couple of painters in each of these areas. I want to start with action painting, and the first artist we're going to look at is a guy named Jackson Pollock. Jackson Pollock grew up mostly in the western United States, in the Southwest, and his family traveled around a lot. And on his travels, he experienced, wide open spaces, vast vistas that only the American West can offer. He also experienced some American Indian culture, especially the sand paintings of the Indians of the Southwest, wherein a medicine man or shaman would take colored sand and let it pour out of his hand and create these shapes on the floor of the desert. And these two aspects of the American West are going to be pretty influential on Jackson Pollock. Another big influence on the abstract expressionists, and especially the action painters like Jackson Pollock, is going to be surrealism. Remember that surrealism celebrates chance. It celebrates unplanned activity, of letting your subconscious take over, of not trying to consciously control what you're doing with the paint and exactly what composition you're going to make. And that is definitely going to influence Pollock and other action painters. Here's an early Pollock work. It's called Going West. This was created under the influence of a teacher named Thomas Hart Benton, who was a famous American regionalist painter. He painted scenes of the American Midwest, and Benton was Pollock's teacher at the Art Students League in New York City. And this work kind of looks like Thomas Hart Benton's work. At the same time, there's something kind of crude about it. Pollock wasn't very good at drawing realistically. And so even on this stylized, abstracted image, we see kind of crudely drawn horses and wagons with not very good perspective. So not the best example of realism, perhaps one of the reasons that Jackson Pollock went into abstraction. He always said about Thomas Hart Benton that the good thing about having Benton as a teacher was it gave Pollock something to react against. And indeed, he sort of rebelled against Benton's teaching and turned away from realism and moved into abstraction. Let's look at some examples of early Pollock work. Here is an abstract painting from the 1940s called Stenographic Figure. And in this work, we seem to have gotten almost entirely away from any reference to the outside world. I mean, if you think about Jean Miro and his surrealist paintings, at least we could pick out like an eyeball or a dog in those pictures. And here, this painting takes a bigger step towards being utterly non-representational. The title suggests that maybe there are letters or numbers in it, and if we look closely, we can see things that look kind of like letters or numbers, but we're not really sure. It's a lot more ambiguous than anything we've seen before. Another Pollock painting called Blue. It has sort of the subtitle Moby Dick, and here again we have taken a step towards abstraction. We can kind of see maybe some animal forms in here, but we're really not sure. There's no clarity in anything here. It's purely just sort of shapes, and you can see the surrealist influence, right? I look at this and I see Miro. I look at this and I see automatic shape making, kind of like the automatic drawing. This next work is from 1943. It's a massive mural that was commissioned by a woman named Peggy Guggenheim, who was an extremely rich art collector and who opened a gallery called Art of This Century, where a lot of modernist painters exhibited their work. And the apocryphal story about this says that Jackson Pollock created it overnight, basically, right before it was due. Guggenheim commissioned it, and for weeks Pollock was just staring at the blank canvas. And then supposedly he finished it in a frenzy of activity in just a few hours. We don't know if that's true, but I have heard other stories about this painting, like in order to get it into Peggy Guggenheim's apartment, they had to cut off several inches of this painting. Also, that at the party at which the painting was unveiled, Jackson Pollock got drunk and urinated in Peggy Guggenheim's fireplace. Who knows, but check it out. It's a massive abstract work, and here we see again the influence of the surrealists automatic mark making, trying to let your subconscious guide the shapes. But we also see a huge, massive scale. This is an immense work. If you get close to it, it takes up your whole peripheral vision. And many people have speculated that this is where the Western aspect of Pollock's biography comes into play. Having seen all those open spaces of the American West, he decided to make really huge paintings that kind of mimic the feel of those landscapes. So this is something that's very different about this American abstraction from what we've seen in Europe. The Americans take it up to a much bigger size. In the late 1940s, Pollock begins to do something that has never been done by any artist. Up to this point, he's been doing the traditional thing of stretching a canvas and putting it on an easel and painting his abstract paintings upright on an easel. In the late 1940s, Pollock begins to take just bare canvas and begins to lay it on the ground. He then takes paints, and he doesn't use traditional paints. He uses household paints like you might get at a hardware store. And he takes just ordinary lowbrow household paints and he dips sticks and brushes in these paints and he splatters this canvas that is lying on the floor with the paint. Nobody's ever done this before. It's completely new. And he walks around the painting, splattering it in a very intuitive way, letting the paint drip and drizzle sometimes. He was a chain smoker, and sometimes his cigarette butts would fall into the paint. He might leave them there. He would walk all the way around the painting, 360 degrees, working the painting from all sides. This is an example of one of the works created in that style, Full Fathom 5. Here is another called Autumn Rhythm, number 30. One of the things that Pollock does is gets away from any reference to the outside world, even in the titling or naming of these paintings. And sometimes he just simply numbers them. One of, again, the scale of these paintings is immense. The idea of the unbroken vistas of the American West, but also putting this unstretched canvas on the floor and drizzling paint on it is reminiscent of those Navajo sand painters that Jackson Pollock saw when he was a kid. So his work has definitely a relationship to the work of those American Indian artists. Now, keep in mind that one of the utterly innovative things that Jackson Pollock is doing is not really making any conscious shapes. I mean, this is even beyond what the Surrealists were doing. He is letting the paint drip and splatter. And one of the questions we might ask is, well, what's the difference between this and a drop cloth that you might be using when you're painting the walls in your house or apartment? Well, keep in mind that Pollock is making choices about what colors he's going to use, in what order. He I mean, as much as he wants to relinquish control, there are decisions that have to be made. He is still moving around the canvas in a specified way and probably reacting to sort of intuitive senses, intuitive urges of balance and distribution. So there are going to be aesthetic differences in this and just something produced completely accidentally if you were painting your room. This painting, not just Pollock's but other abstract expressionist works, are championed by a critic named Clement Greenberg, who loves the fact that these paintings don't reference any sort of subject matter. They exist entirely unto themselves. They are their own world. And Greenberg basically believed that this is the purest, best art that was being produced, that it was superior to art that actually showed subject matter. One quality of Pollock's work is what's called an all-over sort of effect. The painting goes all the way to the edges as if it continues beyond the borders of the canvas on into the outside world. And again, these paintings really have to be seen to be appreciated. You can't appreciate them from slides. You have to get up close to them and let the paintings completely fill your vision and your peripheral space. And you feel like you're sort of enmeshed in this world of drips and splatters. Speaking of drips and splatters, here is a close-up of lavender mist, and you can see the layers of paint. You can see sometimes it's little dots of paint that are dripped on there. Sometimes It is the path of the dripping stick or paintbrush that Pollock has moved. In many ways, these paintings are records of a dance, of activity, of energetic movement, and these are what's left over from Pollock's dance around the canvas. Here is our last Pollock painting called Blue Poles, number 11, and you can see again the massive scale and the all-over patterning of this picture. And here is a photograph of Pollock at work. There you can see him with the canvas on the floor. He's actually stepping on it. He doesn't seem concerned about messing it up by putting footprints on it. He's simply moving around the canvas. Jackson Pollock didn't say a whole lot about his work, but there is one famous quote of his. I'll just read you an excerpt from it. He says this: "My painting does not come from the easel. I hardly ever stretch my canvas before painting. I prefer to tack the unstretched canvas to the hard wall or the floor. I need the resistance of a hard surface. On the floor, I am more at ease. I feel nearer, more a part of the painting, since this way I can walk around it, work from the four sides, and literally be in the painting. This is akin to the method of the Indian sand painters of the West." Pollock was a really revolutionary artist. Love him or hate him, he was an American original, and his works still fetch high prices, along with Vincent van Gogh and Pablo Picasso. He's one of the top three artists in terms of how much money people are willing to pay for his paintings. He, just biographically, he was someone who probably had some mental illness. He certainly struggled with alcoholism most of his life. He was known to drink really hard. And the last year of his life, he hardly produced any paintings at all, sort of drowning himself in alcohol. And he died in a tragic car accident. He had a couple of young women in his car with him, and he was drunk and driving really fast and ran off the road and hit a tree. And he was killed, and one of the young female passengers was killed also. So, not a very savory character and pretty sad life. All right, let's look at another action painter. This is a Dutch American painter named Willem de Kooning. And like Jackson Pollock, he was all about sort of that rough, vigorous mark, which makes him an action painter. So his paintings are also kind of a record of the dance with the canvas. He's painting on stretched canvas on an upright easel. By the way, let's break down the phrase abstract expressionist. You could probably figure it out. Abstract because many of these paintings are moving away, really far away from depicting the observed visual world, so they are abstracted. And expressionist because they seem to be about conveying some sort of feeling, of trying to convey emotion either through color or, in the case of the action painters, through the gesture of the brushstroke, through the energy of the actual mark making. So that's certainly the category that de Kooning falls into. And what de Kooning is best known for is these abstract canvases of women. Uh, these kind of hideous women sometimes. They have distorted features. They kind of look like monsters. Look at this painting, Woman 5, just very kind of energetically painted, loosely, quickly done. And there is sort of a life to this painting just because of the mark making. More de Kooning. Here's Woman and Bicycle. Again, this kind of hideous face that leers at us, surrounded by an environment that is negative space that's also very loosely painted. This might remind us a little bit of the Cubists, who made very little distinction between the background and the positive space. Think about analytic cubism, where people in the backgrounds kind of blend together. I think of that when I look at de Kooning. And here's a much more abstract work by de Kooning. I don't see any women in it. This is called Gotham News. The main thing to look at here is the mark making and the brushstrokes and the energy. Very vigorous. These aren't exactly paintings that are still and meditative and make you slow down and be calm in front of. They are alive and full of energy. Okay, let's look at another branch of abstract expressionism, or the New York School. called color field painting. And this is going to be different from the action painting in that it's not about the marks of the brushstroke. Instead, it's about big zones of color. And the subject of these paintings is 100% color. The idea is that color is inherently emotional and inherently uh, sort of evocative. And you can get an emotional vibe simply by looking at colors. And so these artists are trying to call attention to that, to make you confront pure color. And the first artist we're going to look at is Mark Rothko. I gotta hand it to Mark Rothko. He's just kind of blunt in the titling of his paintings. This painting is called Orange and Yellow, and you can see there is sort of an orange background and a couple of floating squares, the top one yellow and the bottom one red. Rothko, this is what he did. He paints these floating rectangles. That's the main thing he's known for. And they're kind of interesting. These are a lot calmer to me than de Kooning's work. They almost seem like landscapes. Sometimes it seems like a sky and a ground. Uh, but again, the subject of these is pure color. Listen to what Mark Rothko said about his painting and other painters in the New York school. He said, "We assert man's absolute emotions. We don't need props or legends. We create images whose realities are self-evident. We free ourselves from memory, association, nostalgia, legend, and myth. Instead of making cathedrals out of Christ, man, or life, we make it out of ourselves, out of our own feelings." So, like the other abstract painters in New York at this time, Rothko is going to be painting his inner feelings. Here's more Rothko. Check out this title, Bright Blue, Brown, Dark Blue on Wine. More of Rothko's floating squares. Again, this is a pretty solemn, meditative choice of colors. And Rothko gets really simple in the title of this next painting. It's just white center. I gotta admit, I mean, I kind of blow through Rothko paintings sort of quickly when I'm in a museum. I do think there is value, though, in putting yourself in front of one of these paintings and spending time on it, almost like contemplative prayer. Although I don't want to sound really new agey, I don't mean that. I simply mean experiencing the color for a long time, I think, can produce some pretty interesting emotional reactions within viewers. Here's his blue, yellow, green on red. And the next image shows a chapel for which he made some paintings. These paintings are actually canvases that are entirely black. This is in Houston, Texas. His paintings have lent their names to the structure, which is now called the Rothko Chapel. It's an interdenominational chapel, not really associated with any one religion. And the canvases are actually not really black. They're sort of a complicated mix of dark hues, really dark violets and browns and blues. And I've never been to the Rothko Chapel, but I hear it depends on who you talk to. Some people go in there and like, this is it. Other people go in and spend a lot of time in front of the canvases and are profoundly moved. There are stories of people weeping in front of these and other Rothko canvases. So if you have that experience, then that means Mark Rothko has done his job and he has touched your emotions. I might mention a little biographical fact about Mark Rothko too. Like Pollock, he drank heavily, and like Pollock, he was responsible for his own death. Rothko committed suicide at age 66 by slitting his wrists and overdosing on antidepressants. So another abstract expressionist who lived kind of hard and died in many ways before his time. The abstract expressionists had this reputation for kind of being individualistic cowboys, sort of doing their own thing. They were kind of loners, and for some of them, the way they died kind of suggests this. Let's check out our last abstract expressionist painter, another color field painter. His name is Barnett Newman. He is known for paintings that he called zip paintings. And zip for him was the name of just a vertical stripe that would cut through these large expanses of color. and paintings might have one or two or more zips in them. And the way he would make the zips was by putting masking tape down on top of an already painted canvas and masking off a little stripe and just painting that stripe and then peeling off the masking tape, much like you might mask off baseboards or trim in your house if you're painting a wall. So here are some of his works. This is Concord. You can see two zips running straight down the middle of this. Here is the rather humorously titled Who's Afraid of Red, Yellow, and Blue? He had several paintings in this series. This is number 3. And I include it as a photo so you can get a sense of the scale. Remember, abstract expressionists are all about the massive scale so that the painting completely takes up your field of vision and you get immersed, in this case, in the color red. So that is a quality he certainly shared with Jackson Pollock. And here is our last Newman painting called Ornament 6, consisting simply of a single zip in white running through this blue field. Newman actually created a series called The Stations of the Cross. They were abstract zip paintings that are tied to a Catholic meditation device called the Stations of the Cross. It is multiple sort of images that are intended to make you think about the events that Jesus went through during his passion. So if you Google that or look that up, you can see some of Barnett Newman's Stations of the Cross, kind of an interesting abstract way to express a very old theme in art. Abstract expressionism eventually becomes really popular and mainstream, and people are willing to pay lots and lots of money. When Time magazine profiles Jackson Pollock in the 1950s and calls him Jack the Dripper, Pollock suddenly becomes a household name, and in many ways, some of these abstract expressionists are celebrities. However, abstract expressionism and the body of critical theory that was written about it ended up becoming kind of stuffy. Certainly, Clement Greenberg could be kind of snotty in declaring that abstract expressionism was really the best in art that has ever been produced. And people, I think, began to get weary of the seriousness, self-seriousness of abstract expressionism. One person called it the world's most overrated form of interior decoration. And there arose, in the wake of abstract expressionism, a group of artists who were everything abstract expressionism was not. They were really lowbrow, they were not snotty, and they wholeheartedly embraced the concept of images. These were the pop artists. And the word pop is simply short for popular, for these were artists who took inspiration for their work from crass commercial imagery of the time. They would adapt their paintings from things like advertising images, from comic books, and from movies. And pop, or popular art, became the next big fad in America at this time. It was a style of art that the common man could understand. The common man had seen a Campbell soup can or Marilyn Monroe, and here people finally felt like this was art that spoke to them, that kind of spoke their language. And certainly the king of pop artists was a guy named Andy Warhol. Warhol started off as a commercial artist. He was an illustrator, and he achieved fame by creating advertisements for department stores. And he began to take the imagery of the commercial world that he was so used to and used it to start making fine art. And so, for example, we have the Campbell's soup can. Certainly, in most people's estimation, not a work of art by itself, but Warhol, during his commercial art days, had done lots of advertisements like this, and he thought, well, why not produce this as fine art? So he did a whole series of paintings and silkscreen prints that celebrate the Campbell's soup can. And the materials he's using are actually the materials of crass mass reproduction. Silkscreen is a printmaking process that is used on t-shirts and posters, and he used it on fine art. So here is one of his famous Campbell's soup can works called 100 Cans. Here is another called Campbell Soup Cans. It consists of 32 images of Campbell Soup cans, all different flavors. Another Warhol piece, green Coca-Cola bottles. And again, you can see the world of advertising finding its way into fine art in the work of Andy Warhol. Equally famous are works like this one. His gold Marilyn Monroe. He did a lot of images of Marilyn Monroe. This piece actually on the left is the original work, and on the right we see a detail from that work. And here he's made Marilyn Monroe almost seem like an icon, like a Byzantine icon. We have the face surrounded by a gold background. And this is something of a statement, right? Marilyn Monroe is an icon of American culture, and perhaps he is saying that the religion that we kind of adhere to in contemporary America is a worship of celebrities. Here's another Marilyn Monroe, turquoise Marilyn. Andy Warhol, in addition to becoming a super famous, super recognizable artist, most of my students have seen his work before, and you probably have too. He was known for cultivating this really eccentric personality. He wore this platinum white wig, and he was always making these crazy statements. Here are some of his statements that he would say. He said, when someone asked him about his work, he said, "The reason I'm painting this way is that I want to be a machine. I think it would be terrific if everyone looked alike. I want everyone to think alike. I think everyone should be a machine." So it was kind of hard to get to the bottom of who the real Andy Warhol was. He was definitely a mass marketer. He liked selling his own image as this really strange, bizarre, eccentric person. And he was obsessed with fame. The whole idea of 15 minutes of fame comes from Andy Warhol. And he made kind of crazy statements like, fame is like peanuts. When you start, you can't stop. Another time, an art dealer asked him what more he could want besides success and recognition. And Warhol said, "I want more fame." So he was obsessed with his own media coverage. He was actually shot by a woman and who used to hang out with him, and he almost died. And surgeons brought him back from the brink. And when he came out of being unconscious, the first thing he asked about was the media coverage on his shooting. So a really interesting guy. Something I like about Warhol is just he's crassly commercial. He wants to. I just find that kind of refreshingly honest uh, and kind of amusing. So certainly a popular, famous artist who often claimed that there was absolutely nothing behind his work, no deeper meaning. Uh, just look on the surface and it's all there, he would say. So interesting guy, quintessential pop artist. Let's look at one more pop artist. Another, and one thing about pop art, it's fun. It is not trying to be deep and heavy and the end all of art. It is shallow, it's temporary, and it's throwaway, and it's very much of American culture at the time. This next pop artist you're going to look at is named Roy Lichtenstein. And Lichtenstein's main thing that he does is take comic strips, just cheap panels from comics, and blow them up to a large size and paint them. And here's an example called Maybe. And we have this dramatic woman saying, or thinking to herself, maybe he became ill and couldn't leave the studio. And just capturing a moment of melodrama. And if you look closely, you can see her skin is made of little dots. This is a process that was used to color comic strips back in the 50s and 60s, and Lichtenstein is reproducing it at large scale by making stencils with little holes in them that he will put on the canvas and then paint through them. Here's another of Lichtenstein's comic images. Capturing all the melodrama of a soap opera. A woman is in swirling water, and she thinks to herself, "I don't care. I'd rather sink than call Brad for help." So, again, throwaway fun, everything that abstract expressionism is not. And work like this and make that critic, Clement Greenberg, just roll over in his grave. This next work called Wham is incorporating some of that massive scale of abstract expressionist work. It's really big. It's 2 panels. It shows a jet shooting a missile or rocket through the sky and making another jet explode. And finally, this image called In the Car, which contains no dialogue, just a man and a woman driving in a car, not speaking to each other. Quintessential pop art. Now, one of the interesting things about pop art is that it challenges conceptions of what art can be. And this is something Duchamp was doing. If you think back to Duchamp's fountain, the urinal that he displayed, finding sort of a new art status for a common object. And the pop artists are saying, or at least asking a question, can anything that is produced by a consumer culture like American culture in the mid 20th century, can any of that stuff be considered art? They certainly seem to be suggesting that it can. Well, with pop art, we must come to the end of our grand tour. There's still more art we could look at on into the 70s and 80s and 90s. We've looked at a little bit of that actually at the very beginning of this course, but this is all we have time for. I've covered to the best of my ability some of the most important artworks and stuff I want you to know. And I just hope that this course has inspired you maybe to go out and look at art on your own. Maybe now you're better informed, hopefully you are, to go to art museums and recognize some of the stuff you see. I hope now you might want to travel abroad to Europe, perhaps following in the steps of those early grand tourists, and actually see some of this stuff for yourself. There's really no substitute for seeing this art in person. So I wish you well, and I hope you go out and see lots of art after this class. Take care.